Welcome to video number 2 on topic number 9 of Greater Reality Living, 5 Keys to Helping Yourself, Others, in Our World. So topic number 9 is the SoulPhone Project. Now, for optimal benefit, please make sure you've watched video number 1 on the SoulPhone Project before continuing.
We were discussing Dr. Schwartz's shift in the late 1990s to survival of consciousness research. And he reasoned that one of the best ways to begin proving, or in his words, he would say, explore the theory, the hypothesis that life continues after bodily death, was to investigate mediums. He had been around some mediums. He even took classes to become a fake medium. Amazing guy, I told you, because he was aware that some mediums are indeed frauds. They do cold readings, hot readings, and are just fraudulent. Then there are other mediums who are what I call mediocre mediums, just giving really vague information. You know, if the client is 70 years old, they'll say, "I'm picking up your mother," or "I'm picking up your grandmother. She says she loves you. She's sending you kisses." Okay, wow, that, it's not evidential. So Dr. Schwartz wanted to get specific details, and also in a scientific setting where he knew these mediums, there was no way they could detect there's no way they knew who the sitter was, who the subject was. That is, the earthly person who hoped to have a reading with a, quote, departed loved one. So these are the 5 subjects from left to right: Laurie Campbell, top; middle, George Anderson; middle, lower, John Edward; top right, Anne Gemmon; and lower right, Suzanne Northrup. So some of the best mediums at the time. This research was done with the most strict controls, the same sort of scientific research protocols that we talked about with the SoulPhone Project. Controlled studies, which means there would be times where the readings were done by non-psychics, somebody like me. And so the medium, the sitter came in, and a non-psychic would be doing a reading. "I'm picking up your father's dead." "No, he's alive." "Okay, how about your mom?" "No, she's alive too." They're just kind of guessing. And the non-psychics had a 23% hit rate, or success accuracy rate. These evidential mediums, and I'm using the word psychic, I'm sorry, I should be saying mediums. The evidential mediums had an 87% success rate. And the statistical difference between 23% and 87%, the chances are less than 1 trillion that occurred by chance. The mediums were led into the building or through a different door than the sitter. So there's no way the mediums knew who the sitter was, whether the sitter was male or female, because in some of the studies, the experimenter would answer for the subject. And so all the controls were used, double blind, even triple blind, meaning the experimenters wouldn't know which medium was reading for which subject, but a third party would know that. So used all those studies and yet those kinds of results. And so here's a write-up of what they found. Multiple double-blinded laboratory mediumship experiments were published over the past 20 years from research at the University of Arizona, but also University of Virginia, University of Glasgow in Scotland, Institute of Noetic Sciences, and the Windbridge Institute. In addition, imaging studies, PET scans, of mediums' brains suggested that mediumship is more than their imagination. These studies have been published by Temple University, University of Pennsylvania, and the Institute of Noetic Sciences. These are prestigious universities, and I dare say that almost no one knows about this research that is done. which is true scientific research showing that at least some mediums have a verifiable ability to learn specific details from people who have passed on and convey that to their loved ones who are still on Earth, which, of course, is a really strong indication that life continues after bodily death. So here's what happened. And on the right, you see this is an image of the book Dr. Schwartz wrote about all that research called The Afterlife Experiments, forward written by Deepak Chopra. So after those a couple years of experiments and research, some of those evidential mediums became friends with Dr. Schwartz, became colleagues, and they started independently reporting contacts, what we call post-material luminaries, people like Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, and others. And these post-material inventors, scientists were urging him to create spirit communication technology. And those are just amazing stories behind some of them. Over time, that A team formed. There were about 30 primary geniuses, educators, entertainers, because as we discussed, entertainers had the most dynamism while on Earth, and they carry that into the next realm, which means they can really express themselves, whether it's by touch or sound or being able to be seen, projecting their energy, interacting with some of the devices I'll show you shortly. So 30 or so of those, but we're told, again, by this team of evidential mediums who work with the A team, that for every one of them we're working with closely, 30 or so, there are hundreds or more waiting in the wings, but you just can't deal with that many personalities. And so they funnel their input into these 30 or so. Now, it's pretty amazing. I've seen transcripts of it. Sometimes the evidential mediums don't even know if what they convey to Dr. Schwartz are real words, but oftentimes it's exactly what he needed to know. So one, I think it's Suzanne Northrup, said, well, I'm getting that you need to increase your capacitance and decrease your impedance, and I don't even know the hell if these are real words. It's really funny when you think about it. And Dr. Schwartz said, thank you, that's exactly what I needed to know at this point of research. So there will be a book, there'll be a movie about this someday because it's quite a story. This is Rhonda Schwartz, Harry's wife, an amazing woman, a master in fine arts, an accomplished artist. And right after her mom passed, and she was the only child, her mom was her best friend. Her dad had already deceased. Rhonda developed mediumistic abilities. They must have been latent and has become one of the most amazing ones. And she works primarily with the A team. It's a big part of her job. So you can learn more about her at her website, rhondaschwartz.com. And on the right is her having a EEG, electroencephalogram, measuring brainwave changes when she is experiencing doing a reading, bringing in a post-material person versus imagining it versus just meditating. And in each case, there were unique and different EEG patterns. Next, move into proof of concept research. A proof of concept means we've proven that it's possible to have communication technology to communicate with post-material persons. Not that it's accomplished at that point, but that it's possible. And so what I'll share with you now extends over the last 20 years, since about 2004. Dr. Schwartz in his office at the university. And as I've said, he's assisted by an earthly team, electrical engineers, software programmers, optical physicists, evidential research mediums, and other specialists, and then also non-worldly, otherworldly helpers, the A team. And this is a book he wrote called The Sacred Promise, where he reported messages that came from A-team members and even angels who promised to be there and to help him. That was their sacred promise, that he could count on them. And that's certainly been the case with all the research. There's never been a time where what we call a test pilot, when the A-team members didn't show up on time, they worked diligently, sometimes hours at a time, doing mundane tasks, and they certainly are holding up their end. And we are trying very hard to hold up ours as well. So, proof of concept studies. And I say the presence and physics of post-material collaborators have been demonstrated by, first of all, detecting their electromagnetic field. So you might have heard the electromagnetic spectrum. It includes things like X-rays and infrared, ultraviolet, and then the physical spectrum that we can see, which is a very small part of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Well, one of the experiments, he had a electromagnetic detector, and it's just kind of like a wand, about yay long, kind of this big around. And on the end, it can detect a change in electromagnetic field. You can keep it in a metal sleeve called a zero Gauss chamber. I know, too much information, right? And that blocks it totally. So the control is you have it in this shield, and the sensor is picking up no EMR. Then you take the shield off and you just hold it in the air. You lay it down, propped up against something. No one's in the room. What is it measuring then? And all this is being recorded by oscilloscopes and computers and measured with software. And then you ask one of the A-team members to go in and touch the sensor, or put their hand inside the sensor, or send their energy into the sensor. We're actually not sure what they're doing on their end. And oftentimes you will see a spike in the measurement of the electromagnetic fields. I started going to the lab about 7 years ago, and this is one of the first experiments I saw. Dr. Schwartz knew it didn't hold promise to be a practical design, something that people could eventually buy and use as an app. But again, it was proof of concept research. So it was a huge screen and this electromagnetic sensor sitting there in the holder. And that was my office. And so I spent a lot of time in there. And Dr. Schwartz said, okay, let me show you how this works. And he was working at the time with Harry Houdini, who, you're aware of Harry Houdini and what he's able to do on Earth. Well, again, he has that same kind of dynamism, vitality, and the ability to project his energy as a post-material person. Well, Dr. Schwartz had worked with Harry for years, thousands of experiments, not all official. Sometimes they just like give him a play period where Harry could see what he could do. But Dr. Schwartz had pretty much worked out that Harry's pattern was 2 big increases. So if you imagine the x-axis, this is considered 0. And this is pretty much baseline, that when the sleeve is on or nobody's around, the signals just pretty much hover along this x-axis. But then above that are 4 quadrants that align, and there are 4 of them. And Dr. Schwartz had determined that for one of Harry's signature, and we hope that different post-material persons will have an electronic footprint or signature, kind of like each one of us has a different thumbprint. But for Harry, it was 2 quick amplitude spikes into the second quadrant, which he, as I am a baseball fan, so he said the first quadrant was a single, Next was a double, then a triple, then a home run, and it went off the screen. That's an out of the park home. So this is the kind of fun researchers have. So he said, all right, Harry, and he knew that Harry would respond based on years of working with him. Hey, Harry, we're here. Quick side note, it turns out that calling in PMPs, post-mature persons, is not that difficult from calling in a friend. Hey, Fred, come on over here, will you? Hey, Fred. You do it a couple times, and then based on experience, you assume that they heard you and they responded. So he said, okay. I asked him a few times. Gary has no clear abilities. One colleague called him the Helen Keller of mediumship. I mean, he can't see them, he can't hear them, he can't feel them, but he invited them in, and that was good enough for him to start. And so here's the baseline, pretty much nothing. And he said, Harry, if you were here, give us your signal, okay, your calling. And it waited a while, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, nothing. And I thought, is this not going to work? And all of a sudden, there were two huge amplitude spikes close together into the second quadrant. And he said, well, that's Harry. That's his signal. And Gary said, okay, Harry, can you hit a home run for us? And there was a waiting period. And Gary's working hypothesis is that the test pilot has to build their energy, build the reserves to make that kind of effort. And all of a sudden, here's a big spike in the home run quadrant, and sometimes a couple of them, which blew my mind because I had been in this office for weeks at that point, and all I ever saw was this little baseline stuff like a flatline EEG. And then he'd say, okay, Harry, take a break. So there's nothing. Okay, Harry, you think you can knock one out of the park? Again, a pause, off the chart. So when I first saw that, I had my hairs on my arms were standing up. I had hair on my head, it would have been too. Cold chills. I'm like, oh my God, this is really real. I knew it was from all my experience and studies and research, but that definitely increased my knowing to another level. So that's electromagnetic field detection. The next experiment was what's called a dynamical interferometer. And that's basically a device that measures air movement, any breezes. And it was set up in a in an airtight container, and there were sealed wires coming off. So the monitor then is reporting the air movement in this airtight container, which of course is none. So same thing, you see what's the computer reporting or the oscilloscope, pretty much nothing, just a little background noise, a little random noise hovering along the x-axis. Then when the medium says to one of the A team members, test pilots, okay, please create air movement. Again, we don't know exactly if they put their hand in, if they could downsize and put their whole body in, they wave their hand around or what, because we don't have the ability yet to have that kind of detailed conversation. Keep in mind that even the best evidential mediums have good days and bad days, maybe 85% accuracy. They can fall into monkey mind. In other words, what does their brain think versus what they're detecting from the PMP. So we can't ask the evidential mediums to relay what's actually happening. We look forward someday to asking, hey, how did you do that anyway? So anyway, when the test pilot then somehow creates air movement, same thing. There are the increased amplitude spikes on the screen showing that indeed there's air movement in this airtight container when before there was nothing. Proof of concept research that they have physicality, because the law of physics say that there has to be some physical presence or movement to disturb those air molecules, which is what air movement is. But not anything that could be used as a practical device, usable by the public. And then the third one I'll share with this slide is called the silicon photomultiplier device. And that's what you're seeing on the left here, on the right, a laptop. And so this was a box within a box. This was about $60,000 device, because in the inner chamber was a very specialized camera that could detect a single photon of light. And this camera used so much energy to detect that fine amount of light that it had to be cooled to minus 40 centigrade temperature or it would burn up. So we're talking about really advanced electronics here. Baseline, just what you would expect. Here's, in this triple black environment, the camera is detecting nothing, no light, total blackness, and just a little random noise due to electronics. Then the evidential medium would ask one of the A-team members to project their light somehow into the inner chamber, and there would be an increase in light. They would ask the person to move the light from left to right, from right to left, and it did as instructed. Mind-blowing, but how are you going to convert? And people going to schlep around this $60,000, it's about the size of a suitcase device to see photons at their level, and it's not very practical. So these are three of the proof of concept devices. Next, the density of postmortal persons was demonstrated by this attenuation effect. So on one end, you have a emitter of either a laser beam or a photon beam. And then that goes through all these different bounces and forth back between these different mirrors. And that magnifies the signal. And then finally, at the end, a sensor that measures how much time it took to go through all that. So the control of the baseline is nobody's involved, nobody's in the room. We know it takes a certain amount of time, and we're talking nanoseconds, to go from point A to point B. Then the material person experiment, that is, a earthly person, would put their hand in the beam or use a plastic hand inside the beam, and there would be a great decrease in the speed of those beams. Then they would ask the post-material person to put their hand in, because it turns out that the evidence points to that those who have passed on are not just like Casper the Friendly Ghost. They're not just, floating around with a cloud of smoke or energy. They have density, or can have density if they want to in that moment. Their consciousness, their energy can manifest in different ways depending upon what their goals are, with whom they're interacting, what they want to do, etc. So they put their energetic hand in, spirit hand in, and indeed there was a statistically significant slowing of the beam as compared to the baseline. Not as high, of course, as a big solid human hand, but a change nonetheless. This is like the size of a dining room table. This is tens of thousands of dollars to set all that up. So again, not a practical device. Then we move into sound. This is the experiment that I mentioned earlier that got me on the team. And Dr. Schwartz and I were involved in the group Eternia, and he sent me and other team members results of this experiment. So this is what his wife Rhonda and a audiologist soundproof chamber. You see the baffles inside. It has a vibration dampening floor. The chamber is wrapped with copper foil, so it's effectively a Faraday cage, which means it makes it more impervious to electromagnetic fields around it. It's in a room that doesn't have any heating or cooling ducts, so you don't have it getting hotter or cooler. Its temperature is more controlled, and same way with airflow. It can be used with no light in there, door shut, so it's pretty controlled environment. You see the huge, I mean, it's about 2.5 foot wide, plexiglass dome in front of it. Inside, a very expensive, specialized microphone to detect sound. The baseline was that nobody's in the booth, nobody's in the room, and the microphone picked up about what you expect, almost nothing. Again, showing on the computer screen, on the oscilloscope, pretty much flat line, a little bit of random noise, what you expect to control the baseline conditions. Then Rhonda went in and just whispered into the microphone, again, because it's so ultra sensitive. 9 words that you see, some of them pasted above the little plexiglass window of the booth, soundproof glass. And those words were to be spoken every second or 2 seconds. So they were paced. So if there was a blip with an amplitude on the screen, we knew it was due to the words being said. So Rhonda whispers, and you see the amplitude spikes right on time, on cue for the 9 words. And then a post-material person came in, Michael Jackson. Hard to imagine somebody more dynamic, expressive than him, and he yelled the 9 words. Again, because he's in another realm, call it dimension, frequency. And so it really takes a lot of emphasis for us to pick up his voice, yelling those same 9 words. And indeed, they were smaller than Rhonda's, but statistically significant above the baseline, increases in the signal for each one of the words. It's not that we could hear his words, but we could see that the monitoring devices were picking up increased energy, vibration. Those 9 words, by the way, were speaking for the A team. We are here to help you heal your world. And when I read this, I got tears in my eyes, a lump in my throat. I just knew that I needed to help him. And the rest is history. That was 7.5 years ago. By the way, this early device, or early research on detecting sound, is the precursor of the what we're calling the soul voice or soul audio component, that someday will be like a phone, being able to talk with and hear loved ones and luminaries who have changed worlds. And then finally, on this slide, visual images. So now we're talking about seeing. Dr. Schwartz received through one of the evidential mediums from David Bohm that they, that is post-material persons, could be detected by the human brain, but only 1 or 2 frames out of every 10,000. So Dr. Schwartz heard that and thought, okay, I'll get a high-speed camera. I think it took 60,000 frames per minute, really expensive camera, and had the camera facing a black wall. So control was nobody's in the room and the camera's running. And this is all being collected then by computer, and software is showing what the results are and about what you would expect, blackness. Then a team member, this material person, was asked to stand in front of the camera, and then later asked to move back and forth in front of the camera, because it turns out cameras, as with the human eye, detect movement better than a static motion image. And indeed, there were a number of frames collected that showed not clear images, we wished, but grayer, whiter, anomalous images, shading, etc. He had a software specialist who was a post-grad student from India, was brilliant, and she created proprietary software that set any frames that were different from the average blackness. And putting those together, then you could see some sort of rudimentary movement. Again, changes in lighting and shading. So precursor here for the soul video. We're seeing, and eventually what we're doing right now, seeing each other. Fascinating stuff.
This is the end of video number 2 on the SoulPhone Project. I'll continue with video number 3. Let it shine.